The slap cracked through the quiet Colorado morning like a gunshot. My neighbors froze, hoses spilling water onto the grass, while my son stood silent, and my daughter-in-law smiled like she owned the world. That day, I learned $680,000 wasn't the only thing she could steal. She wanted my son, and my soul. Stay with me, because what happened after that slap will leave you questioning how far family can bend before it breaks. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been dismissed, betrayed, or made to feel invisible, share it. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because maybe the next story will remind you of your own strength. The sting on my cheek lingered, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. The Colorado sun was barely over the rooftops, but every detail burned itself into my memory. The sharp smell of freshly cut grass, the glint of water spilling from Mrs. Caldwell's garden hose, the hush of neighbors holding their breath. And then, Marcus, my son, the boy who once hid behind my legs on his first day of kindergarten, now stood taller than me, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. I searched his face for outrage, for a spark of the protector I'd raised him to be. Instead, I found silence, a silence so heavy it pinned me harder than the slap itself. Beside him, Sloane straightened her jacket, her lips curving into a victorious half-smile. Her diamonds caught the sunlight, throwing cruel sparks across my porch as if mocking me. It wasn't the kind of smile that softened a room. It was a smile made of glass shards. The kind that cuts you long before you realize you're bleeding. Inside, my thoughts were a storm. How had it come to this? Just months ago, they still had a beautiful home. A colonial on Juniper Lane, the same house I'd poured $50,000 of my retirement into. I painted its walls with my own hands, planted roses along its path, believing I was helping them build a future. Now that future had been sold, liquidated, and burned away. And here they stood, demanding to live under my roof, as if my years of sacrifice were nothing more than a safety net for their recklessness. I touched the railing of my porch, the paint worn smooth by decades of weather, and whispered to myself, "Not this house. Not my peace." The neighbors shifted uneasily, some raising their phones, capturing the moment that would stain my name before I even had a chance to defend it. Sloane leaned closer, her perfume sweet and suffocating. "You can't say no to us," she hissed, voice low enough for only me to hear. "You won't survive what comes next." I clenched my jaw, the copper taste of resolve rising in my mouth. Because in that instant, I knew this fight wasn't just about shelter. It was about survival, and I was ready for war. I stepped back into my house, my sanctuary, as though the worn oak floors might shield me from what had just unfolded on the porch. The air inside carried the faint scent of morning coffee, still warm in the pot, and lavender from the sachets tucked in drawers decades ago. This was more than a house. It was my history pressed into wood and brick. 30 years of night shifts as a nurse, 30 years of scraped knees and birthday candles, 30 years of sacrifices that no one but me seemed to remember. Marcus followed hesitantly, his shoes scuffing the hardwood. I heard him swallow, as though words sat heavy in his throat but refused to surface. He looked older than his 35 years, hair unkempt, shadows bruising the skin beneath his eyes. My heart clenched. This was still my boy, but life, or perhaps the woman beside him, had hollowed him out. Sloane entered last. She didn't hesitate, didn't glance around with the nostalgia of family. Instead, her sharp eyes swept across the living room, cataloging the china cabinet, the framed photographs, even the clock that had ticked through every Hayes family meal. Her gaze was an inventory, not affection, like an appraiser calculating what could be claimed. I poured myself coffee, steady hands hiding the storm inside. "So," I said carefully, "what is it you've come here to tell me?" Marcus slumped into my late husband's recliner, his fingers tightening around the armrest as if clinging to a lifeline. "Mom," he murmured, "we need to talk. We sold the house." The words clung to the air like smoke. I already knew which house he meant, Juniper Lane, the colonial I'd helped them buy, the one I'd painted and planted with my own hands. I forced my voice to stay calm. Which house? Our house, Marcus whispered. Before I could reply, Sloane crossed her legs, her designer heels tapping against my rug as though keeping time to some private rhythm. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. We sold it for $680,000. It was the right decision. Plans change. Her eyes locked with mine, gleaming with a confidence that felt less like pride and more like a challenge. And in that stare, I felt it, the seed of something darker, something that had nothing to do with real estate or money. This was only the beginning. From the window, I caught sight of them before they even rang the bell. 2 suitcases, oversized, glossy, too new for people claiming hardship, rested on the edge of my porch. Beside them, Marcus strained to drag 2 more bags from the SUV. The thud of wheels against the concrete driveway echoed like warning shots. The air outside carried the faint chill of October, sharp enough to sting, but my skin prickled for another reason. Something about the scene felt rehearsed, like actors taking their places on a stage they thought they controlled. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on the apron I still wore from tending my roses. "What's going on?" I asked, though a knot had already formed low in my stomach. Marcus didn't meet my eyes. His voice was tight, frayed at the edges. "Mom, we need to talk." Behind him, Sloane stood perfectly composed. Her tailored coat hugged her figure, her blonde hair gleamed in the pale sun, not a strand out of place. She rested one manicured hand on the handle of her suitcase and let her gaze travel slowly over my house. The porch railing, the curtains in the front window, even the potted geraniums by the door. Her eyes weren't admiring. They were calculating. It was the look of someone deciding what was worth keeping. Marcus cleared his throat, pulling my attention back. "We sold the house," he said. I froze, the words slicing into me with surgical precision. "Which house?" I forced out, though my body already knew the answer. "Our house," Marcus whispered as though ashamed. "The one on Juniper Lane." The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity. In my mind, I saw the hours I'd spent painting those walls, the weekends planting lilies in the front yard, the afternoons fixing shutters alongside my husband before he passed. That house had been more than wood and stone. It had been a promise, a foundation for Marcus's future. And now it was gone. Sloane's lips curled into something between a smile and a smirk. "It was the right decision," she said smoothly. "We got $680,000. That's a good deal in this market." My pulse hammered. "Why didn't you tell me you were even thinking about selling?" She tilted her chin, eyes cold. "We didn't need permission, Bessie. It was our house." The words stung, not for their truth but for their cruelty. She said "our" with such possession, such finality, as though Marcus's history, our family's sacrifices, meant nothing. Inside, something shifted. The slap outside had hurt, but this moment planted something else. Suspicion. The suitcases, the rehearsed lines, the gleam in her eyes. This wasn't just about selling a house. I caught Marcus's shoulders slumping further, his tie crooked, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He looked like a man carrying a secret he didn't have the strength to voice. And standing beside him, Sloane radiated control, calm, certainty, too much certainty. As the 3 of us stood in my living room, the hardwood beneath us groaning under the weight of unsaid words, I realized I was no longer just uneasy. I was afraid. Because in that moment, staring at the suitcases lined against my wall like soldiers ready to occupy, I understood this wasn't a visit. It was an invasion. And every instinct in me whispered that I was about to lose more than just my son's house. I steadied myself on the edge of the counter, my coffee cooling untouched in its cup. My voice came out smaller than I intended, but I forced the words through clenched teeth. "How much did you get for the house?" $680,000, Marcus mumbled, eyes still fixed on the floor. But it was Sloane who answered with clarity, her tone crisp, like a realtor announcing a record-breaking sale. And we've already taken care of most of it. I blinked. Taken care of? What does that mean? She crossed her legs, smoothed her skirt, and leaned back against the sofa as though she owned it. Expenses, she said simply. Necessary ones. Necessary. I repeated, my chest tightening. You had nearly $700,000. What could possibly? I bought some jewelry, she interrupted, as if ticking boxes from a shopping list. Real pieces, not the cheap things. A car upgrade, leather interior, custom trim. I paid off my credit cards. Took a wellness retreat in California with my sister. Oh, and I helped her redecorate her house. She was due for something fresh. Her voice was calm, even cheerful, like she was recounting errands from the grocery store. I tried to form words, but they tangled in my throat. All I could see were images. My hands blistered from painting their colonial, the hours spent in their garden, the pride I once felt when Marcus signed those closing papers. I had poured $50,000 of my retirement into that house. And now the money was gone, turned into handbags, candles in a spa resort, and a leather interior for a car I'd never see. How much jewelry? I whispered. Sloane tilted her head, flashing a bracelet that caught the light. Does it matter? It was ours to spend. My breath caught. Ours. She kept using that word, as though Marcus were merely an extension of her will. I turned to my son. Marcus, is this true? You let her. Mom, he cut in, his voice low, broken. Please. It's complicated. Complicated. My voice cracked. You had more money than I've ever seen in my life. And it vanished in months. Sloane's eyes gleamed, cold and unapologetic. You're overreacting. Money comes and goes. Besides, I invested too. My stomach dropped. Invested. Yes, she said, a hint of pride slipping into her tone. 300,000 in a boutique. A friend's business. It's going to be very successful. The words fell heavy in the room, absurd in their finality. A boutique. $300,000. More than I'd earned in a decade, gone to a dream that had no storefront, no track record, nothing but Sloane's blind faith, or worse, her arrogance. And the credit card debt? I pressed, my voice trembling with rage. About 90,000, Marcus admitted, his shoulders sagging further. Clothes, shoes, vacations before we were married. I staggered back, dizzy, clutching the counter for balance. The numbers swirled in my mind, stacking higher and higher until they towered over me like a wave about to break. 680,000, devoured by luxuries, debts, fantasies. And still, they had the audacity to drag their glossy suitcases to my porch and ask to stay. Something inside me hardened. This wasn't just recklessness. It was desecration. Every dollar they burned carried the weight of my sacrifices. Nights I'd worked double shifts while Marcus slept. Years I'd lived frugally to build even a modest cushion for retirement. I looked at my son, searching for the boy who once promised me at his father's funeral that he'd take care of me. All I saw was a hollow shell, seated in his father's old chair, letting his wife speak over him, for him, through him. And Sloane. She wasn't even hiding it. Her smile widened when she caught my stare, as though daring me to protest. For the first time, I saw her clearly. Not as Marcus's wife, not as part of my family, but as a predator, one who had already sunk her teeth into my son's life and was circling for more. The storm building in my chest had nowhere to go. So I stood, my voice quiet but firm, carrying more weight than the scream I longed to unleash. This ends here. The room fell silent, but beneath it, I sensed something darker moving. The suitcases by the door seemed to pulse in the corner of my vision, reminders of their intent. They weren't here for a visit. They were here to settle in. And as the morning light stretched across my living room floor, I knew one thing with piercing clarity. The real fight hadn't even begun. The silence in the room pressed against me like a weight. Marcus sat hunched, his hands limp against his knees. Sloane's perfume filled the space, sickly sweet, invasive, as she leaned forward, eyes glittering with calculation. "So," she said, her tone casual as if she were asking about the weather, "we'll stay here. Just for a few months. Until the boutique takes off." I steadied myself. The house seemed to hold its breath with me, the clock on the mantel ticking louder than it ever had, the floor creaking under my feet. "No." The word was quiet, but it rang with finality. Marcus looked up, startled, his face pale. "Mom, please." I said no. My voice grew firmer. "This is my home. I've worked my entire life to keep it. I will not open my door to recklessness and deceit. Not now. Not ever." The temperature in the room shifted. Marcus's lips trembled, but no sound came. And then Sloane rose to her feet, her heels striking the hardwood like gunshots. "You can't be serious." Her smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "We are family. Family doesn't turn each other away. Family doesn't burn through nearly $700,000 on jewelry and spa trips," I shot back. "Family doesn't sell a home built on sacrifices and then come crawling for shelter as if nothing happened." Sloane's eyes blazed. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table and tossed it down with deliberate force, the crack echoing like a threat. "You think you can humiliate us? Fine. Let's see how you feel when everyone knows what kind of heartless woman you really are." Before I could respond, she yanked open the front door. Sunlight spilled into the room, sharp and merciless. The morning air carried every word that followed. "Neighbors," she shouted, her voice shrill, cutting through the quiet street. "Come see how Eleanor Hayes treats her only son. She's throwing us out, onto the street, after we lost everything." My stomach dropped. Across the street, Mrs. Caldwell straightened from her garden hose, her eyes widening. The Johnson boy abandoned his bicycle, its wheels spinning silently on the pavement. Curtains shifted as other neighbors peeked from their windows. I stood frozen in the doorway, my pulse hammering, as Sloane's performance grew louder, more desperate, and more rehearsed. She clutched Marcus's arm as if she were the victim in a play designed for pity. She slammed the door on us. Sloane cried, tears streaking her flawless makeup. On her own son. The man who worked his whole life, who trusted her. "She's heartless, bitter, jealous." I opened my mouth, but no words came. The humiliation burned hotter than the morning sun on my skin. The neighbors watched, their silence cutting deeper than judgment. And then, Sloane crossed a line she couldn't return from. She turned, her eyes blazing with venom, and with a swift, vicious motion, her hand struck my face. The sound cracked across the street like a rifle shot. For a moment, the world stilled. Mrs. Caldwell gasped audibly, her hose spilling water into the gutter. The Johnson boy's mouth hung open. Even the mail carrier froze mid-step, letters clutched in his hand. I staggered back, my hand flying to my cheek. The sting was sharp, but sharper still was the silence of my son. Marcus stood only inches away, yet did nothing. His shoulders slumped, his mouth half open, his eyes darting between us like a trapped child. I searched his face for outrage, for even the faintest spark of loyalty. Instead, I saw only confusion and fear. "Did you just hit me?" I asked, my voice trembling yet steady. Sloane lifted her chin, defiance etched into every line of her face. "You deserved it. Throwing your family out on the street like trash." The words cut deeper than the slap. Around us, the neighborhood shifted uneasily, whispers rippling like wind through dry leaves. I felt the weight of their eyes, of their judgment, pressing against my already fractured pride. But beneath the shame, something else stirred. A fire. I straightened, my voice low, sharp, and cold. "This is my home. You will not shame me. You will not bully me. Get out." Sloane sneered, her fury boiling over. "You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go." That, I said, each word deliberate, is not my problem. Her laugh was harsh, empty. But in her eyes, I saw something flicker, uncertainty, fear. Because even Sloane must have known, the slap had changed everything. And for the first time, I wasn't the one afraid. The sting on my cheek faded to a dull throb, but inside, something sharper had awakened. I stood rooted on my porch, the echo of Sloane's slap still ringing through the quiet street, neighbors frozen in their yards like witnesses to a crime. Enough. I turned away from her shrill accusations, away from Marcus's haunted silence, and stepped back inside my home. The door shut behind me with a decisive thud. For a moment, I leaned against it, letting the cool wood steady me. My hands shook, not from fear, but from resolve. On the side table sat my old Rolodex, a relic of another era. I rifled through the cards until I found it. Daniel Ortiz, attorney at law. My late husband had trusted him with our estate years ago. My fingers hesitated only briefly before dialing. The line clicked, and a calm, steady voice answered. Ortiz Law. Daniel, I said, my voice tight but unyielding. It's Eleanor Hayes. I need your help. Today. Within an hour, I was sitting in his office. The blinds filtered sunlight into thin, sharp lines across his desk, like the bars of a cage. Daniel Ortiz, silver hair neatly combed, studied me with the quiet patience of a man who had seen too many families collapse under the weight of money and betrayal. I told him everything. The sale of the house, the $680,000 squandered, the suitcases on my porch, and finally, the slap heard across the neighborhood. His pen scratched steadily across yellow legal paper, his expression unreadable. When I finished, silence settled between us. My throat burned, but my eyes were dry. I would not cry. Not here. Daniel set his pen down, folding his hands. Eleanor, he said evenly, you need to understand something. You have more power than you realize. I frowned. Power. I'm a 62-year-old widow who just got slapped by her daughter-in-law in front of half the neighborhood. Yes, he said, leaning forward. But you also have documentation. That promissory note you mentioned, the one for the $50,000 you contributed to the Juniper Lane house? If it was structured as a loan, you have legal leverage. Strong leverage. My heart stumbled. You mean, I can sue them? You can demand repayment, with interest, he said. And since they sold the house without satisfying the lien, you may even pursue damages. Combine that with the assault. He paused, his gaze steady. Eleanor, you're not powerless. You can fight back. Fight back. The words lit something inside me. For months, maybe years, I'd felt myself shrinking, letting Sloane dictate, watching Marcus wilt under her control. But now I had a weapon. I thought of the neighbors' faces, the humiliation on my porch. I thought of my late husband's recliner, occupied by a son who no longer looked like himself. And I thought of the roses in my garden, resilient even against the early frost. I straightened in my chair. File it, I said. Daniel nodded once, sharply. Then we start today. As I left his office, clutching the folder he'd prepared, the autumn wind whipped against my face. My cheek still carried the faint imprint of Sloane's hand. But for the first time, I didn't touch it. Because the next time Sloane tried to strike me, it wouldn't be with her palm. It would be with lies, manipulation, and legal threats. And I would be ready. The day after meeting Daniel, his paralegal called to tell me an investigator would be in touch. Her name was Priya Patel, and when she arrived at my doorstep, I was struck by her quiet confidence. Dark hair pulled back, eyes sharp as flint, she carried a slim leather folder that looked far heavier than its size. Mrs. Hayes, she said, her voice calm, Daniel asked me to verify the legitimacy of your daughter-in-law's claims. Specifically, this boutique investment she mentioned. I invited her into my kitchen, the hum of my old refrigerator the only sound as she spread documents across the table. Credit card statements, wire transfers, bank ledgers, numbers danced across the pages like a language I didn't speak. Priya tapped one sheet. This is where it starts. $250,000 wired to a friend of your daughter-in-law's. Supposedly seed money for a boutique. My breath hitched. Supposedly. She flipped to the next page. Screenshots of the Colorado Secretary of State's business registry. No business license filed. No lease agreement. Not even a website domain. Mrs. Hayes, the boutique doesn't exist. At least, not legally. I stared at the black ink, the cold evidence. $300,000 to thin air. Priya's voice softened. That's not all. She produced another stack of receipts. Hotel bookings, jewelry store invoices, luxury spa trips. Each page was a dagger. $12,000 at a jewelry boutique in Aspen. $8,500 for a weekend spa retreat in Malibu. $22,000 for a car interior upgrade. My chest tightened, rage coiling hot and suffocating. She burned through almost $700,000. And Marcus, my son, sat there and let it happen? Priya didn't answer. Instead, she slid a final envelope across the table. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were grainy photographs, taken with the kind of discretion only a professional could manage. Sloane, draped in a silk dress, arm linked with a man I didn't recognize. Dinner at a high-end restaurant. A weekend at a ski resort. A kiss exchanged in the shadow of a black Mercedes. My vision blurred, my throat raw. Who is he? Richard Beaumont, Priya said. Construction magnate. Married. Wealthy. He's been seeing Sloane for at least 6 months. Most of the luxury purchases, jewelry, trips, the car detailing, they coincided with her time with him. The words struck like a thunderclap. My daughter-in-law hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen my son's dignity, his trust, his life. She's been funneling your son's money to fund her affair, Priya continued. The investments, the credit cards, even the boutique excuse, they were all ways to cover her spending on this relationship. And when the man's wife found out, he ended it. That's why Sloane and Marcus sold the house so suddenly. She was desperate. She needed liquidity, fast. I sank into my chair, the edges of the room closing in. Images of Marcus as a boy flashed before me. His first soccer game, the way he clutched my hand at his father's funeral, the promise he made that night to always take care of me. Now here he was, hollowed out, broken, standing silent while his wife slapped me across the face in front of our neighbors. She destroyed him, I whispered. Priya leaned forward, her tone measured but firm. And she'll keep destroying him until someone stops her. You have leverage, Mrs. Hayes. Between the promissory note, the fraudulent investment, and the assault, you have enough to force a reckoning. I lifted the photographs again, my hands steadier this time. Sloane's smile stared back at me, smug, triumphant, cruel. But now the mask had slipped. I could see the rot beneath the polish. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir inside me that wasn't grief or shame. Resolve. This wasn't just about getting my money back. It wasn't even about my humiliation on the porch. This was about saving my son, from the woman who had stolen his future, his pride, his soul. I slid the photos back into the envelope and looked Priya in the eye. Then let's make sure she never gets away with it. Priya nodded once, closing her folder. We'll start with the financial trail. And then, she paused, a spark of determination in her gaze. We'll bring the mask all the way down. Marcus stood in the motel bathroom, the cheap fluorescent light flickering above him. The mirror reflected a man he barely recognized. His jaw was unshaven, his tie askew, dark crescents carved beneath his eyes. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the sink, watching beads of water drip from the tap in slow, uneven intervals. How did I become this? Once, he was the boy who promised his mother he'd take care of her. Once, he was the man who beamed with pride when he signed the deed to the Juniper Lane house. Now he was a hollow figure, drowning in someone else's reflection. Sloane's voice echoed in his head. You begged me to marry you. You knew you hit the jackpot. He pressed his palms harder against the porcelain until his knuckles whitened. A knock at the door jolted him. He opened it to find me, Eleanor, standing there, eyes weary but unyielding. I stepped into the dim motel room, taking in the rumpled bed, the half-packed suitcase, the stench of takeout cartons. My son looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. Marcus, I said softly, we need to talk. He sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. Mom, I don't know where to start. Start with the truth, I replied. He looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. You think all of this, he gestured helplessly at the mess around him, at the chaos of his life. You think it's just Sloane. But it's not. I let it happen. Worse, I did things. My stomach tightened. What things? His voice cracked. I falsified income on our first mortgage application. Sloane told me everyone does it, that it was harmless. I left cash off our taxes 1 year, too. And the car loan, we inflated numbers to get a better rate. Each confession landed like a hammer, splintering the image of the responsible man I thought I had raised. Marcus. He dropped his gaze. She said it was normal. That it was just playing the system like everyone else. And I believed her. Or maybe I just wanted to. Because if I questioned her, I was afraid she'd leave me. The words lodged in my chest, sharp and merciless. My son, my flesh and blood, hadn't just been manipulated. He'd been broken. I sat beside him, close enough to feel the tremor in his shoulders. Marcus, listen to me. You made mistakes, yes. But you are not beyond saving. What she has done to you, this is not love. This is control. He shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know who I am anymore, Mom. I reached out, tilting his chin so he faced me in the mirror across the room. Look at yourself. Do you see the man staring back? He's my son. He is still in there. Buried, maybe. Bruised. But not gone. And I will not let her take him from me. His breath shuddered, tears streaking down his face. For the first time in years, he leaned into me, not as a husband caged by his wife's expectations, but as the boy I once held through thunderstorms. I don't know how to fight her, he admitted. Then let me fight with you, I said firmly. But you have to choose. You can't stand in her shadow and mine at the same time. You have to step into the light, even if it burns. Silence stretched between us, heavy but not hopeless. He looked once more at the mirror, at the tired, broken man staring back. And in the faintest flicker of his eyes, I saw it, a spark. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Because for the first time, Marcus wasn't just seeing his reflection. He was seeing the prison Sloane had built around him. And somewhere deep down, he was starting to remember what freedom looked like. The county courthouse wasn't grand. It smelled faintly of dust and old wood, fluorescent lights buzzing above like angry bees. Yet as I walked into courtroom 3B, my heart pounded as though I'd entered a coliseum where my entire life would be weighed. Marcus walked beside me, shoulders tense, his suit hanging loose from stress. At the opposite table, Sloane sat with her attorney, Sarah Chen, a sharp woman in her 40s with sleek black hair and eyes like steel. Sloane herself looked immaculate, her hair freshly styled, makeup flawless, navy dress conservative but expensive. She clasped a tissue in her hand as if preparing for tears, the picture of a fragile woman wronged. Judge Hart, silver-haired and stern, entered and commanded silence. Mrs. Hayes, the judge began, you are bringing a civil claim against your son and daughter-in-law for breach of a promissory note, as well as damages. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, my lawyer, Daniel Ortiz, answered, his voice firm. Ms. Chen rose first. Your Honor, what we have here is not fraud, not theft, but a bitter mother-in-law punishing her son's wife. My client, Sloane Hayes, has been demonized. She has lost her home, her stability, and her dignity. And now she is being dragged into court, harassed by someone who has never accepted her. Sloane dabbed her eyes with the tissue, her lips trembling. A ripple of sympathy moved through the gallery. Neighbors, acquaintances, all curious to see the family drama laid bare. I clenched my fists under the table. The performance was flawless. She could have been on Broadway. When it was Daniel's turn, he didn't waste words. He placed the promissory note on the judge's bench. "This," he said, "is a legally binding agreement. $50,000 loaned by my client to her son and daughter-in-law for the down payment on their Juniper Lane home. Repayment, with interest, beginning 1 year after purchase." 3 years passed. Not a single payment was made. Then the house was sold, and the lien ignored. "That, Your Honor, is breach of contract and theft." Judge Hart adjusted his glasses, studying the document. "The signatures are clear." Ms. Chen stood quickly. "Family loans are often informal, Your Honor. It was never intended to be repaid. It was a gift, cloaked in paperwork." Daniel didn't flinch. "Then why, Counselor, did Mr. Hayes himself insist on drafting it officially, acknowledging his responsibility in writing?" The room stirred. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but stayed silent. Daniel continued. "And there is more." He gestured, and investigator Priya Patel stepped forward. Calm and precise, she presented her findings. Bank transfers to a boutique that didn't exist, wire receipts to a friend of Sloane's with no registered business, luxury expenses that devoured nearly $400,000 in less than 6 months. Each document hit the record like a stone dropped into still water. Judge Hart's expression darkened. "Mrs. Hayes," he addressed Sloane, "do you dispute these records?" Sloane straightened, her voice fragile but laced with defiance. "I invested in opportunities. Not every business succeeds overnight. And yes, I spent some money on things that made me happy. That's not a crime. Fraud is," Daniel countered. But the blow that shattered her composure came next. Daniel called his final witness. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and Richard Beaumont walked in, a man in his 50s, expensive suit pressed to perfection, jaw clenched. He avoided Sloane's gaze as he took the stand. Under oath, he spoke evenly, every word slicing through the air. "Yes, I was in a relationship with Mrs. Sloane Hayes. She told me she was divorcing, that she needed help maintaining her lifestyle. I provided funds, jewelry, trips, dinners. I did not know those funds came from the sale of her marital home." Gasps rippled through the room. Sloane's face drained of color. "Lies," she cried. "He's lying. He." "Silence," Judge Hart snapped. Richard continued, his voice heavier now. "My wife discovered the affair and ended it. That's why I stopped supporting her. I regret ever being involved." The courtroom buzzed. Ms. Chen scribbled furiously, but no spin could erase the image now burned into everyone's mind. Sloane, not as victim, but as manipulator, betrayer, thief. I watched her shoulders stiffen, her mask of innocence cracking under the weight of truth. Marcus sat frozen beside me, his hands trembling, eyes wet, not with surprise but with shame. The judge banged his gavel once. "We will recess. But let me be clear, the evidence presented is troubling. Deeply troubling." As the bailiff called for order, I sat straighter, my heart pounding not with fear this time, but with something fiercer. The tide was turning. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt it in my bones. Sloane's empire of lies was crumbling. And I was no longer standing alone. The courthouse still smelled of varnish and dust when the news broke. I hadn't even reached my car when Marcus's phone buzzed. His face drained of color as he handed it to me. "Mom, look." On the glowing screen was Sloane's Instagram account, her profile picture a perfect smile against a backdrop of aspen snow. But the post pinned to the top was far from perfect. "Some wounds are deeper than a slap. I've been vilified by someone who was supposed to be my family. Imagine losing your home, your future, and your dignity, all because your mother-in-law never accepted you. Please, don't let my voice be silenced. Attached was a photo, her eyes red, mascara streaked, tissue in hand. She looked fragile, broken, a woman crushed under cruelty. The caption ended with a hashtag already spreading like wildfire. Hashtag mother-in-law from hell. By nightfall, Sloane had gone viral. TikTok compilations played clips of her crocodile tears outside the courthouse. Influencers stitched the story, painting me as a controlling mother who couldn't let go of her son. The comments seared. This poor woman. Who does that to family? Classic narcissistic mother-in-law vibes. If this is true, Eleanor Hayes should be ashamed. Shame. The word clung to me like smoke. Marcus paced the living room, pulling at his hair. Mom, they don't know the truth. They don't know about the boutique, the affair, the money. They don't want to know, I said quietly, staring at the screen. They only see the story she feeds them. Because Sloane wasn't fighting in court anymore. She was fighting in the digital coliseum, and the crowd had chosen their gladiator. The next morning, local news picked it up. A reporter's voice filled the TV. Aurora woman claims her mother-in-law is suing her out of spite after a family disagreement. They showed Sloane's tearful face. My name. My address blurred on the screen, but still close enough that neighbors whispered. When I went to water my roses, Mrs. Caldwell barely met my eyes. The Johnson boy turned away. The world wasn't just judging me, it was isolating me. That night, my inbox flooded. Messages from strangers. Monster. Rot in hell. One email read simply, "We know where you live." I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling. For decades I'd been Eleanor Hayes, nurse, widow, mother, neighbor. Now I was a villain trending online, stripped down to a caricature of bitterness and spite. Marcus slammed his fist against the wall. We can't let her win like this. We have to fight back. But how does a 62-year-old widow fight the wildfire of the internet? Daniel Ortiz called the next morning. His tone was steady, but his words sharpened the air. Eleanor, this isn't just about court anymore. Sloane's building a narrative. If it sticks, it can sway public opinion, even influence the judge. She's destroying me, I whispered. She's trying to, he corrected. But remember, you have evidence. You have truth. And truth doesn't vanish just because she shouts louder. Still, the weight pressed heavy. Each notification on my phone was another dagger, another stranger convinced I was the villain in someone else's story. That evening, Marcus sat across from me, his face pale, guilt etched deep. Mom, this is my fault. If I hadn't married her, if I'd stood up sooner. No, I interrupted, taking his hand. This is her doing. She's playing her last game. And we'll answer it, not with noise, but with proof. He looked at me, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but flickering with something else, resolve. I closed my laptop, shutting out the flood of poison pouring from the screen. Because yes, Sloane had unleashed a digital war. She had armies of hashtags and strangers willing to believe her lies. But I had something stronger. I had the documents, the witnesses, the photographs, the truth. And when the next court date came, I would make sure her empire of lies crumbled, not just in whispers, but in the record books, where no hashtag could erase it. The courtroom was more crowded than the first time. Word of the case had spread. Neighbors, curious townsfolk, even a few local reporters squeezed into the benches. The tension in the air felt electric, as though everyone knew today would decide more than just money. Sloane entered like a starlet walking onto a stage. Her navy dress was traded for a soft grey suit, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, a string of pearls resting delicately against her collarbone. She carried no tissue this time. Instead, she radiated calm control, as though she knew the ending already. Beside her, Attorney Chan adjusted her blazer and whispered something, earning a confident nod from Sloane. The judge, stern as ever, rapped the gavel. We are here to conclude Hayes versus Hayes. Counsel, proceed. Ms. Chen rose first. Her voice was smooth, honeyed. Your Honor, what we have witnessed is not fraud, but a family fracture exploited by resentment. My client has been paraded as a villain, yet she is the true victim, ostracized by her mother-in-law, abandoned by her husband. She sold her home under duress, and now faces a lawsuit designed not for justice, but for vengeance. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Sloane folded her hands neatly in her lap, eyes cast down, the image of dignity. But then Chen delivered her weapon. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Marcus Hayes himself engaged in financial misrepresentation, falsifying income on loan applications, underreporting taxes. These actions were done with his mother's knowledge. The words cracked like thunder. My heart lurched. Marcus's head shot up, his face pale. That's a lie, I blurted, before Daniel gently pressed my arm. Patience, he whispered. Ms. Chen turned toward me, lips curving. Or perhaps Mrs. Hayes has forgotten. How convenient. For a moment, the courtroom tilted. My son's mistakes, the confessions whispered in that dingy motel room, were about to become Sloane's shield. But Daniel stood calmly, adjusting his glasses. Your Honor, if I may respond. Judge Hart nodded. Counselor Chan is correct. Mr. Hayes did falsify certain documents. But what she fails to mention is that these acts were not conceived by him. They were coerced, pressured, even orchestrated by his wife, the defendant, who maintained copies of every falsification as leverage. Blackmail, Your Honor. Classic manipulation. Gasps erupted. Daniel continued, his tone sharp now. We have sworn testimony from Investigator Patel, who uncovered these records in Mrs. Sloane Hayes's possession. Not Marcus Hayes's desk. Not his files. Hers. Priya Patel approached the bench with a binder, her steps steady. Inside were scans, emails between Sloane and a mortgage broker, her notes scrawled in the margins. Add 20K to salary. He won't notice. Remind him everyone fudges taxes. The gallery buzzed louder, voices colliding like waves. But Daniel wasn't finished. And there is more. While Mrs. Hayes smeared my client online, launching a viral campaign to paint herself as a victim, she was simultaneously wiring funds, large sums, to maintain an affair with one Richard Beaumont. The doors opened, and Richard himself strode in once again. This time, he carried a folder of hotel receipts, wire transfers, jewelry invoices, all under Sloane's name. Your Honor, Richard said, his voice low but steady. I was deceived. She told me she was single, told me she had her own money. In truth, she bled her husband dry to fund our relationship. I regret every moment of it. But I will not let her continue to spin this narrative unchallenged. Sloane's mask cracked. Her lips curled, her face drained, her hands trembled against the pearls at her neck. It's all lies, she shrieked, the controlled image shattering. They're all conspiring against me. That money was mine, mine. Marcus was nothing without me. His mother was nothing but a bitter old woman jealous of what I gave him. Her voice rose higher, wild, echoing off the walls. Reporters scribbled furiously. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide. Judge Hart banged the gavel. Order. But the damage was done. The mask had slipped fully now. No poised victim, no elegant daughter-in-law. Only a woman unraveling, venom spilling with every word. Daniel's final blow was quiet, precise. He handed the judge one last document. The promissory note, with both Marcus and Sloane's signatures clear as day. This is the core of our case, Your Honor. Everything else, her fraud, her affair, her smear campaign, only underscores what this document already proves. A legal debt. A deliberate betrayal. And a woman who has weaponized every lie she could invent to avoid accountability. The judge's gaze fell heavy on Sloane, who now sat hunched, hair disheveled, eyes blazing with panic. Mrs. Hayes, he said slowly, this court is not swayed by theatrics. The evidence is overwhelming. You engaged in financial fraud, deceit, and manipulation. You attempted to defame the plaintiff publicly. You abused both the law and the trust of your family. I rule in favor of Eleanor Hayes. Judgment: $67,000 plus damages and legal fees. Furthermore, I am forwarding this case to the district attorney for review of criminal fraud charges. The gavel fell. The gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, a collective exhale. Beside me, Marcus closed his eyes, tears slipping down his face. I reached for his hand, squeezing it, not in triumph, but in quiet recognition. We had survived. As bailiffs escorted a trembling Sloane from the courtroom, her eyes found mine, burning with hatred. She mouthed two words: "Not over." But for the first time in months, I felt steady, strong. The woman who once cowered under her slap was gone. The war was ending. And the truth had finally won. The courthouse was behind us, but its echoes lingered. For days afterward, the air around my little house on Maple Street felt lighter, as though a storm had passed and left silence in its wake. Sloane was gone, her polished mask shattered under oath, her empire of lies turned to ash. The judge's ruling had not only restored my financial standing but also given me something more valuable: vindication. Yet even in victory, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, wiser, changed. Marcus came by one evening, a paper bag of takeout in his hands. He looked different now, still weary, but straighter in posture, clearer in his gaze. He sat at the kitchen table where his father and I had shared countless meals, and for the first time in years, he looked like the boy I remembered. "Mom," he began, his voice rough, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want it anyway." I studied him, the lines of regret etched deep into his face. "Marcus, you lost your way. You let someone twist you into believing weakness was love. But the fact you're here, admitting it, that matters more than you think." His eyes brimmed. "I should have protected you. Instead, you protected me." I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine. That's what mothers do. But sometimes, protecting means stepping back and letting consequences fall where they should. That's the hardest part. We ate quietly, the simple meal more healing than any grand gesture. And as the sun set through the kitchen window, casting golden light over his tired face, I realized something. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my son. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began piecing his life back together. He found work at a smaller firm, humble but honest. He rented a modest apartment and paid his debts little by little. Most importantly, he began to rediscover himself, not as Sloane's puppet, but as his own man. And me. I changed the locks, yes. I installed cameras. But I also planted new roses in my garden, bright red ones, thorns sharp and unapologetic. They became a symbol to me. Beauty and protection can coexist. Looking back, I realized the lesson wasn't about betrayal or money. It was about boundaries. About knowing when kindness becomes enablement, and when forgiveness must be paired with accountability. Love doesn't mean shielding someone from the truth. Sometimes, love means standing firm enough to let truth do its work. To those of you listening now, maybe you've faced something similar. Maybe someone you trusted drained your spirit, your wallet, your hope. I want you to hear me when I say this. You are stronger than you know. You can draw a line. You can fight back. You can protect what matters, even if your voice trembles. Because I was 62, a widow, humiliated on my own porch, and I still found the strength to say no. And if I could, so can you. So tell me, have you ever faced a moment when standing firm cost you everything, but gave you yourself back? Share it in the comments. Let's see how far this story of resilience and truth can travel. As for me, I'll be in my garden, tending to roses that bloom brighter after every storm.